The screams echoed through the trees. I couldn't tell if they were human or animal. All I knew was that they were loud, which meant that they were close. As I listened to the high-pitched shrieks, it almost sounded like a couple of people having a shouting match. If I'd been at my apartment in town, that's exactly what I thought was the sound. But then the pitch changed, and then it took on a feral quality. I knew whoever or whatever was making the sound. I wanted nothing to do with them. Thinking you're alone in the wilderness is one thing. It gives a certain freeing feeling, like you're so close to nature. But knowing you're alone and hearing the terrifying, nearly indescribable sounds sent chills down my spine. I quickly questioned how much longer I would be alone, or alive. Did those things know that I was here? Were they planning their attack? Or was it just a gathering of something, like a harmless chill session in the woods, in the dead of night? Survival instinct was screaming for me to get out of there as quickly as possible. To hell with the tent and my supplies, just leave. For a brief moment, I nearly listened. Later, I wish I had. Fortunately, I hadn't made a fire yet, and decided against one now. If by some miracle those things didn't know I was here, a fire would draw them in like flies to, well, something I didn't want to be in. Even though the screaming was still going on at a fever pitch, I quietly snuck into my tent and zipped it shut, as if some flimsy material would magically keep at bay whatever beasts were raging out there. Searching through my pack, I found my Swiss Army knife, and kept it in a firm grasp as I lay down on my sleeping bag. I didn't dare settle in for the night. Sleeping through being attacked by wild whatevers and torn to shreds can be bad for my health. As I lay there, eyes wide, listening to the horrible shrieks that seemed to come from everywhere, they suddenly stopped. At first, this was a relief, but when the sound stopped, so did all the other noises of the forest. It was as if someone had hit the mute button on all of nature. I heard a loud thumping sound that sounded like drums beating faster and faster, until I realized it was my heart. Trying to calm myself so I didn't have a heart attack on the spot was a challenge. I tried to think of a calm blue ocean and sunrises, of beautiful things that had nothing to do with the situation I was in. Apparently, I did my job too well. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up in a panic. Jumping up, I looked all around for the beasts that were coming to get me. When all that stared back at me were the contents of my backpack and the four walls of the tent, I allowed myself to take a few deep breaths. It was morning. The sun was up and the birds were singing. I took both of those things as a good sign. Being alive was a bonus as well. It was decision time. Do I pack up and cut my trip short by 2 days, or do I write off last night's incident as a rare occurrence and not worry about it today, and the daylight as the sun's rays bathed me in warmth? It's funny how fear manifests itself so much stronger at night. Last night, the forest seemed like the most horrifying place I'd ever been. Today, it looked like all the beauty of nature was spread out before me. I couldn't imagine anything bad happening in such a picturesque place. As I looked out over the clearing in the woods, I saw a large dark spot that was moving towards me. I dove into my tent and emerged with a pair of binoculars. Peering through them, I saw the spot was a bear, and it was heading my way. So much for nothing bad happening in nature. My plan of action was to hide and hope it went away or turn down another path before it got here. That plan didn't work out so well. Within 15 minutes, I could hear it sniffing outside the campsite, looking for something to eat. I hoped it wouldn't be eating a fresh camper. The can of bear spray was firmly in my hand, with my white knuckles clenching it. Having it was one thing, using it was another. That was my last resort. Spray and run. The sniffing got louder, and I could see the bottom edges of the tent being pushed in by a large nose. My knuckles grew a little whiter as I followed its progress along the edge and around the tent. And then there was a pause. A dreadful pause. The kind of pause that horrible decisions are born from. I was contemplating my own horrible decision when the sniffing started again, this time leading away from the tent. Breathing a cautious, optimistic sigh of relief, I opened the tent flap just enough to see the bear lumbering off into the woods. Again, I held a silent vote, just like the song said. Should I stay or should I go? I'd only been camping out here once before, but I didn't remember it being this dangerous. Maybe I just got lucky last time. Not wanting my luck to run out, I packed up my tent and got ready to leave. The sun was already high in the sky, leaving me a few hours to hike out what took me a full day to hike in. I looked for bear tracks to see which way it had left, but the ground was so dry there was nothing to see. Crossing my fingers, I headed out on the trail, hoping it had gone some other way. It was easy going, making the terror of last night fade even more. I still kept a wary eye out for the bear, though. No use getting so caught up in nature that I ignore her dangers. After around an hour of walking, I found a large rock on the side of the trail and decided to take a break. Pulling out a granola bar and a bottle of water, I looked around as I snacked. There was a clearing out in the woods and a rough path leading to it. It wasn't any official path, just one that happens when a lot of feet go the same way and tramp down the foliage. There was a faint whiff of smoke coming from the clearing, but I couldn't see exactly what was causing it. My curiosity wanted to see what was there, but my common sense said, no way. In the end, curiosity fought dirty and said the smoke meant there had been a fire, and ashes could blow up into the trees if the wind picked up and cause a wildfire. It was a good point, even though the wind was uncannily still at the moment. I took a quick look around to make sure that the bear wasn't sneaking up on me, then started down the narrow path. The trees blocked out some of the light as I headed down the path towards the clearing, making me literally descend into the darkness. It wasn't a good feeling. My eyes darted around looking for anything out of the ordinary, and I slowed my pace. Then suddenly, the trees opened up and daylight shone brightly on the clearing and remnants of the fire, with a wisp of smoke still rising. Whoever had made it had been dangerously uncaring about the safety of the woods. The fire sat right in the middle of the patch of grass, with no rings of stone surrounding it. My ire rose at the carelessness of this person. I found myself wishing very bad things on them when I noticed something else. There were splotches of red all around the fire. It was like someone had spilled red paint all around. It was strange. Why would someone bring paint out here in the middle of the woods? I stalked around the other side of the fire, looking for the answer to this mystery. Unfortunately, I found it. There was something pale sitting just outside of the burnt grass of the fire. It was next to a splotch of red. I bent down to move the grass to see more clearly. Picking it up, I saw it was a severed human toe. I dropped it and stood up like a shot. The red splotches made sense to me now. They weren't paint. They were blood. A chill ran down my spine. I suddenly felt very alone and surrounded. My eyes darted all around the clearing and into the trees as I did a slow circle, searching for whatever was about to attack. As I searched, I saw the red splotches led off into the woods in the opposite direction of the trail. Curiosity tried to get me to follow, but I told it to shut the hell up and hightail it out of there, my head on a swivel searching for threats. Just as I was about to reach the main trail, I literally ran into the bear. I've been so busy watching behind me for whatever might be chasing me that I didn't see what was in front of me. It turned to face me, showing its red teeth. Then it stood on its hind legs, dwarfing me, and roared. I wish I worn the brown pants because I soiled myself in fear. I was so terrified I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. It dropped back down onto its front legs and approached me, teeth bare. I knew right then it was responsible for the screams and the dismembered toe. The only thing I couldn't figure out was the fire. I never heard of bears being able to start a fire. This was unfortunately the last thing going through my head before being eaten. It sniffed and took a step back. If I'd known dropping a load in my pants would save me, I wouldn't have done it last night. As I looked into the eyes of my death, it wasn't looking back at me. It was looking past me. I wasn't sure what kind of trick this bear was pulling. It wasn't like it had to fool me or anything. It had me dead to rights. Curiosity made me turn and follow the bear's gaze. I instantly regretted it. Standing near the clearing was a monster. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It stood on hind legs at least 8 feet tall. It had the horns of a deer, but the face looked like that of a deer skull with no skin on it. Its shoulders were covered in what looked like a cloak made of another animal's skin. The bear let out a deep growl full of menace. I took the opportunity to back away and allow the bear a clear path to its adversary. It glanced at me for a moment, then started towards the monster. As soon as it was past me, I dropped my pack and ran down the trail with every ounce of speed I could muster. It didn't matter that my car was miles away. It didn't matter that there was no way I could sprint all the way down there without collapsing or having a heart attack. Just then I heard the fight. The growling, roaring, slashing, knocking trees down. A fight that would have been awesome to watch from inside a bunker with 2-inch thick concrete walls. Just me alone with a rocket launcher to defend myself. There was no way I was sticking around. I ran for a solid 10 minutes before the stitch in my side told me that I had at least slowed down to a walk. I didn't dare to stop though. I knew I had to keep moving. It was the only chance of surviving by some miracle. The sounds of fighting echoed through the trees, making it seem surreal to hear it, then hear it back again through the echoes. It sounded like the fight was slowing down. I hoped it would last for a little bit longer. Maybe, whichever one, would forget about me or be too tired to track me down. My walk had become a limp. I was nearly out of energy and had a mile to go to the relative safety of my car. Surely by now I could take it easy. As the thought rolled through my brain, the sounds of the fight ceased. The fading echo was all that remained. I wondered which one had been victorious, and comforted myself that the victor was surely enjoying the spoils by feasting on the fallen adversary. But in the back of my mind, unease grew. What if it didn't forget about me? What if it was following me right now? I found myself walking a little faster, much to the pain and chagrin of my legs. The silence that fell in the aftermath of the fight was disconcerting. The animals around that had been chattering away, suddenly falling silent, was alarming. I started jogging, each step a new exercise in pain. There was no doubt that I was being followed. The footsteps behind me were getting louder by the moment. My car was in sight. I was almost free. The footsteps behind me were very loud. I knew it was right behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Run. Don't think, just run, my thoughts screamed at me. Even my curiosity had no desire to look back. 10 steps from the car, I dug into my pocket looking for my keys. For a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't find them. Then I dug a little deeper and came away with my prize. I hit the remote to unlock the car and drove into the driver's seat. The engine had just roared to life when the monster appeared. I threw the car in reverse and stomped on the gas, whipping around and making the monster miss crashing through the windshield. I jammed it into drive and floored it as the monster recovered and started after me. For a long, horrid moment, it seemed to be catching up to me. The road was gravel and had several potholes in it. I found myself swerving to miss the biggest one so my car wouldn't bottom out, but by doing so, the monster gained ground. It was almost within reach of my bumper when I slid sideways onto the main road. Once on the pavement, I floored it and watched with satisfaction as the monster fell behind. I breathed a sigh of relief as I relaxed and settled in for a ride home. It wasn't long until I pulled into my driveway and parking. My head fell back against the headrest and I was tempted to take a nap right there when my nose reminded me of the state of my pants. Walking in empty-handed was a mixed blessing. I'd left hundreds of dollars in equipment behind, but at least I was alive. My shower called to me. I stripped, threw away my pants and underwear into the trash, then settled into the longest, most rewarding shower of my life. After drying, I threw on a Metallica t-shirt and a pair of shorts. I came back out into the living room and settled in to watch a movie. Horror was out. I knew I'd have nightmares for weeks about my ordeal. I decided to watch an episode of Wipeout. 3 episodes later, I found my eyelids fighting gravity and exhaustion. Heading to bed, I turned out the lights and stepped up to the living room window. Looking out over the lights of town, I sighed seeing the trees of the park far in the distance and knowing I'd never visit there again. Before I turned towards my bedroom, something caught my eye. It was impossible. I rubbed my eyes to be sure. The monster was creeping out of the woods and coming straight towards my house. As I watched it, it looked up at me and saw me. Our eyes locked, mine full of fear, its full of menace. I ran through the house making sure every door and window was locked. After that, I went to my bedstand and pulled out my snub-nose .38, checking to make sure it was loaded, and grabbing a handful of extra bullets, shoving them into my pocket. Running back out into the living room, I looked out the window, but it was gone. Pressing my face against the glass, I searched the front yard, but it wasn't there. For an instant, I wondered if my imagination had been playing tricks on me. I went to the kitchen window and looked out into the backyard. It was dark and I couldn't see much. Reaching for the light switch, I hesitated, not wanting to see if it suddenly appeared in front of me. But I had to know if this thing was real or not. I would rather that I'd go crazy than ever see that thing again. Flicking on the lights, I took a half step back. Nothing was there. I scanned the entire backyard all the way to the woods that bordered my property. Nothing. I shrugged and was about to go to bed when I heard it. My foot stopped on the first step and I turned back towards the door. Someone or something was scraping against the front door. Feeling like I was in a trance, I was drawn towards the door. Leaning up to the peephole, I closed my eyes and breathed a silent prayer that nothing would be there. My prayers were answered. Nothing was there. As tempting as I was to just accept this audible hallucination, my shaking hand reached for the doorknob. The distance between my hand and the door seemed to fade, like those scenes in a horror movie when the camera zooms in while going backwards. I turned the knob and held my breath while opening the door. Nothing was there. I released a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Looking around, the yard was empty, just the evening mist clinging to the lawn. My imagination had gotten the best of me. I turned to go back inside and saw the door and the door frame. They had long scratches on it. My blood froze. It was real. It was here. It had tracked me down. As terror gripped me, I saw a flash of brown fur in an instant before it charged me. In sheer desperation, I fell back into the door, just as it hit the doorframe. Its antlers slammed into the doorframe, sending splinters flying as it struggled to get loose from the destroyed wood. I laid on the door, watching in grim fascination, stunned by the fact that it missed gouging my eyes by a mere fraction of an inch. The doorway had saved me, the same doorway that was rapidly disappearing under the monster's onslaught. I regained myself and ran. As I darted through the living room, somehow I had the presence of mind to grab the house phone and dial 911 as I headed down the basement steps, slamming the door behind me. 911, what's your emergency? Came the lady operator's voice. I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me, I said, vaulting down the stairs. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm being chased by a monster who's trying to kill me. Are you talking about a person? No, what don't you understand about the word monster? I shouted. All right, it's my duty to inform you that prank calls will be reported to the police and you could face charges. Fine, send the cops. Maybe they can fight off the monster long enough to put me in cuffs. The line disconnected. Son of a... I said as I heard the monster stalking around inside the house. I squeezed myself into the far corner between the wall and an oil tank and tried to be as quiet as possible. Barely breathing, I listened to its measured steps as I crept from room to room. The floorboards complained with loud creaks, telling me this thing weighed considerably more than me. I heard it turn towards the stairs and thought about making a run for the cellar door that led outside when my phone rang. Hello? I whispered, screamed, trying to be as quiet as possible. Is this the person who just called 911 about a monster? Yes, who is this? There was a pause as I heard footsteps change direction. I'm from another agency, he said. Could you describe the monster for me? So you're from one of those 3-letter agencies that always say they don't spy on our phone calls. Could you just describe the monster for me? It's huge, I whispered. At least 8 feet tall, covered in fur, and wearing fur of another animal over its shoulders. Oh, and it has antlers, like a deer. I heard a sharp intake of air. Where is it? I gave him my address. I meant, where is it in the house? It's on the first floor, and I'm in the basement, I whispered. But I think it's coming down here. Just then I heard the basement door open. Gotta go, I whispered, then hung up the phone. The basement stairs groaned under the weight. I hoped that the wood would collapse under the weight, and it would fall, snapping its neck. No such luck. The stairs creaked as it continued to the bottom. I had to duck in this basement, so I was sure it was on all fours to keep from getting tangled on the rafters. My heart pounded. I struggled to keep my breathing quiet so I wouldn't give away my position. The shuffling of the monster's breathing was getting closer. I wanted to close my eyes, but had to know when it came close enough. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gun. Aiming it at the corner, I waited. The skeletal snout appeared, but I didn't shoot. The shot would just bounce off of its bone. I wanted to hit something more vital and hoped that I might survive somehow. The rest of the bony skull made its appearance and went by without noticing me. Next came the neck and the rest of the body. I wasn't sure where this thing's vital organs were, so I held off, hoping that it might not notice me at all. Those hopes were dashed when it sniffed, then whipped around and stared right at me. I took that as a sign to shoot it in the chest. The gunshots were deafening, especially in such close space. My ears were ringing so loud I could barely hear the monster screaming and tear my oil tank limb from limb, trying to get to me. I fired again, trying to hit any part of its body as oil flew from it, thrashing around. We were both covered in heating oil, and yet it still kept coming. 3 more shots didn't even slow it down. It was so close the muzzle of the gun was nearly touching it. I shoved the barrel in one of its eye sockets and pulled the trigger. The flame from the exploding gunpowder set the oil on fire. I don't know if it was that or the bullet bouncing around in its skull that made it shriek even louder. Flames engulfed its screaming form, making it look like a demon straight from hell. It ran out of the basement through the outside doors, bursting out into the open air and disappearing into the night. I was so relieved I didn't notice right away that I was on fire. The oil had splashed on me and had ignited when the monster caught fire. I tried to push my way out quickly, but The monster had shoved the tank closer to the wall, pinning me. The fire devoured the oil on my clothes and my bare skin, making me scream in agony as I tried in vain to get away from the fire. This was it. I would die this horrible, agonizing death, trapped in an inferno. The monster would get its revenge and not even know it. Maybe once it extinguished its own fire, it would come back and devour what was left of me, like a well-done steak. I must have been hallucinating. I could have sworn a cloud enveloped me just before I died. I woke up in a white room with an annoying beeping sound that wouldn't stop. There was a smiling face sitting in the corner, staring back at me, attached to a man I'd never met. "How are you feeling?" he said, stepping over to the hospital bed. "Am I dead?" I rasped. "Not yet," he chuckled. "It was close, though. If we hadn't gotten to you when we did, you would have been a shish kebab." I tried to lean up, but the pain put me back in the bed. "Yeah, you're not going to be taking any hiking trips for a while," he said. "You've got burns all over your legs that will need some time to heal." "I'm never going hiking again," I said. "Are you the guy I talked to on the phone?" "Yeah. Do you mind telling me the rest of what had happened?" he said, pulling out a pen and notepad. "Sure," I said, shrugging. "Since you saved my life, it's the least I could do." He pulled his chair over and got comfortable. "What happened to that monster anyways?" I said. He hesitated. "It got away, didn't it?" "Yeah," he said, lowering his head a little. "We lost the trail after it extinguished itself, but don't worry. We'll find it." I didn't comment on my opinion of the competencies of the government agencies out of respect for the man who saved my life, but suffice it to say, I won't be sleeping very deeply once I get back home. "Where would you like me to start?" I said. "The beginning is always a good place." My pace quickens and my mind races without thought. I have long lost possession of my faculties, most taken for granted. I can hear its voice, but it does not speak in words. It is like a slideshow playing in my mind. Images flashing through my head and a crushing tunnel vision consumes me. Some images are foreign, but others are familiar. The snow beat down on our camp and we huddled close for warmth. The expedition was our first opportunity to study bacteria found in some of the most inhospitable places in the world. It would be a great adventure, until everything went wrong. The third day began no different than the first two. Our team of 5 broke camp early to cross the Abradella Cave Pass before noon, storms reducing visibility to impenetrable walls of snow. The pass sat atop a massive ridge, snaking through Argentina, and the ascent was grueling. We trained for months, but nothing can truly prepare a person for the oxygen-starved air found 16,000 feet above sea level. We reached the pass at noon and took a brief rest to hydrate and eat. Our team leader was a colleague and a good friend of mine. Brian and I had worked together in a biological research lab for 4 years. He was a veteran field researcher and actively encouraged me to expand my horizons beyond the lab. The team also included a scientist who went by Susie, and 2 lab technicians named John and Isaac. Susie was researching the effects of high-altitude weather patterns on biological diversity, and the lab techs were there to provide technical support. Dark clouds were beginning to form in the distance. Brian slid his pack off and walked towards a better vantage point to scout our descent. "We should probably head down over there," he shouted, over wind buffeting the peaks above us. "How long will it take for us to reach a safe altitude to camp?" asked Susie. "I'm not sure, but we should reach somewhere to camp before losing light," Brian responded, without gazing down from the distant clouds. "My concern is getting off this pass before lightning or snow becomes a danger," he added, pulling his pack on and gesturing for us to follow. We hiked along the ridge towards the area where Brian felt he could begin our descent. The winds were much stronger now, and I could sense a nervous tension in the air. "I don't know if this is going to work," Brian yelled over his shoulder. We were assessing a long, narrow ledge connecting the area where we stood to sloping stretches of shale that might lead us down towards the tree line. The ledge was no more than a few inches wide, and there were no good handholds. Jagged rocks and a steep slope lay 20 feet below. A fall could kill one of us, and a serious injury would likely be the death sentence when night fell. "I don't think this is a good idea," Susie said. "I agree. We need to circle back and find a safer way down," Brian conceded with a frown. He slid by the rest of the group and began leading us back towards the area where we had rested an hour earlier. The temperature had dropped significantly, and ominous black clouds were approaching from the west. A light snow began to fall as we searched for another route. A new trail led us around a different peak and seemed more promising. We descended with relative ease until the snow began falling faster. Visibility declined from several yards to a few feet, and strong winds whipped snow into our eyes. The cold pierced my jacket, and my boots struggled to find sound footing as we pressed forward in total silence. It was very difficult to gauge our progress, and I was not sure that we were making any. "I think we need to shelter," I yelled over the howling winds. Brian stopped several feet ahead of me. I was not sure he heard me, but he eventually turned and nodded in agreement. I looked around to determine if there was a suitable place to pitch our tents. The dark silhouettes of a tree was all that I could see through the swirling snow. "I can't see anything. We need to pitch a tent and get out of this wind," Brian said. He pulled a tent from his pack and motioned for me to assist him. The tent flapped violently in the wind, and it took all 5 of us to assemble it. Securing it to the ground in the deep snow was a lost cause, and we piled in to prevent it from blowing away. Susie and Isaac were shaking, and I was concerned for their health. Brian ducked outside to retrieve sleeping bags from our packs, and suggested we huddled together for warmth. Attempting to pitch the other tents and sacrificing warmth for privacy did not make sense under the current circumstances. I thought the deafening howl of the wind would keep me up all night, but exhaustion won out, and I eventually drifted off. I woke to total silence. Light crept down the walls of the tent and everything seemed still. I slipped on my wet gear and stepped outside. A virgin coat of snow covered the ground and extended as far as the eye could see. I thought we had reached the tree line, but I could not see any signs of vegetation. I also did not see our packs. We had left them outside to make room in the tent, and several feet of snow now concealed them. I dug in the general direction where I remember placing the packs, but to no avail. I returned to the tent where my hands began to shake. "I can't locate our packs," I told Brian. "They have to be there, and we'll find them," he replied. "How is everyone feeling?" "I'm not doing too well," said Isaac, shivering in his bag. "I think I'm sick," he added. Nobody needed to say anything. We all knew we would be unable to travel with the sick team member. "We need to locate the packs and boil some water," said Brian. He joined me outside for the search, and we scoured the area for more than an hour without any luck. "This isn't good," Brian groaned. "We have no food, and it'll be very difficult to melt snow without a stove." We returned to the tent to inform the team our bad fortune. Isaac looked very frail, and we decided to let him rest for a day before pushing on down the mountain. Susie located a granola bar in her pocket, and we were able to melt a small amount of snow in an empty canteen. It was not adequate nourishment for a team of 5 on a physically demanding expedition, but we thought it was enough to endure one more night. A fresh coat of snow dashed any optimism the next morning. I was hoping to find our way below the tree line, where small villages offered the prospect of food and shelter. The snow would be very difficult to cross without snowshoes or skis, and Isaac remained ill. "John and I are going for help," Brian said, from behind me. I turned to find both of them standing outside the entrance to the tent. Brian appeared very serious. "What if you become lost in the snow?" I asked. "It's going to be very dangerous, but doing nothing is no longer an option," Brian replied. "We will travel until noon and return if we haven't found any signs of people. We'll be back by night if we don't find help." I did not like the idea of staying behind, but I knew John was our strongest hiker, and leaving Susie to care for Isaac by herself was not a good idea. Susie spent her time talking to Isaac and melting snow in her canteen. I passed the day thinking about all the food I would have eaten when Brian and John returned with help. The hours went by slowly, and I began to worry as the sun descended towards the horizon. The winds returned that night, and I found it difficult to sleep. Brian and John were out there somewhere. Would they be returning with help in the morning? Or had something terrible happened to them? Where could they be? I asked Susie, but she had already dozed off. I wish I could turn off my mind. The morning brought more snow, and I began to understand the meaning of cabin fever. I needed to go somewhere, and to do something, but 3 days without food had left me feeling weak. Susie and Isaac had resigned themselves to waiting for help, and I did not have a better plan. Time passed with little meaning, and despair began to control me. Night came and went, I think. I found myself struggling to concentrate the following day. I could not remember how long it had been since I had eaten, and I was losing weight at a startling pace. I tried to think about other things, but I could feel my body devouring itself from inside. Susie's face appeared taut, and Isaac's was emaciated. I was sure we were going to die, as the sun disappeared behind the mountain. I shot up off my back at the sound of crunching snow. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "No, I didn't hear anything," replied Susie. "There it is again," I insisted. "I don't hear anything at all," said Susie, sounding frustrated. Unzipping the entrance to our tent, I craned my neck to see if someone was approaching. "Brian?" I yelled. "John? Is that you?" There was no response. I stepped from the tent and yelled again, but the encroaching darkness seemed to swallow all sound. I could still make out the edge of a distant peak, and the last rays of sun casted it in an eerie glow. I was preparing to climb back into the tent when something caught my eye. It was the silhouette of a tree near the edge of our camp. I had looked for trees in the daylight, and our camp was well above the tree line. Nevertheless, there it was. Was I hallucinating? I had to know. A tree could provide fuel for a fire, and we desperately needed heat. I was fighting my way through the snow when a sliver of moonlight escaped the omnipresent clouds. The broken beam of light danced across the ground and illuminated the dark presence looming just outside my perception. Its trunk was a gaunt body, and its limbs slender arms that dragged upon the ground. A long hairless muzzle covered most of its strangely proportioned head, and matted hair clung to its face in clumps. Dark eyes sat in sunken sockets and seemed to stare through me with a woeful and penetrating gaze. A horrible sense of dread enveloped me, but the fear was paralyzing. Leaning forward, the creature opened its massive jaws and released an awful scream that shook the ground beneath my feet. It sounded like the fierce winds whipping through the mountains. It sounded angry, and it sounded of pain. I woke up in my tent. My head hurt badly, and my stomach ached with hunger. Susie looked like she was losing strength. Had it all been a dream? "How long have I been sleeping?" I asked. "You aren't well," she replied. "You were hallucinating and collapsed in the snow. Brian never returned. John tried, but he didn't. Well, he didn't. John is dead." Susie stammered with tears welling in her eyes. "That doesn't make any sense. John went for help," I argued. "He tried to return," she said. "I found him this morning. He was only a few hundred feet from the tent. He probably didn't even know we were here in the dark, but I spotted his orange jacket this morning. Susie tried to keep me in the tent, but I didn't believe her. I couldn't believe her. If John was dead, then Brian was probably gone. My friend was dead, and we were all going to die as well. The sun burned my eyes as I scanned the horizon. It didn't take long to locate John's bright orange jacket. I lurched through the snow until I stood over him. His skin was a bluish gray, and he had a peaceful expression on his face. I should have felt bad, but I didn't. I was hungry. Every human needs to eat, and I was starving. I pulled out my pocket knife. I would only take a few small cuts of meat and share it with Susie and Isaac. They might think I was a monster, but they must not want to starve. I pulled John's pants down to his knees and attempted to cut into his thigh. The bitter cold had frozen his entire body. It would be impossible to cut into him in this condition. A wave of despair washed over me. I was so hungry. I returned to the tent without telling Susie about my plan. Isaac's health continued to deteriorate. I did not want him to die, but Susie and I might be able to survive until the snow melted, if he passed away. "How is Isaac?" I asked. "He's not doing well," she said softly. "I think he can make it another day, but I'm not sure." I tried to rest, but my hunger was growing. I could not think about anything else. If only there was a way to warm John's body, I thought. We could eat until Isaac died, and then we would have enough food to provide for a few more days if we kept the meat warm. I looked over at Isaac. His chest rose and fell with short, halting breaths. Susie snored gently beside him. I knew we could not wait any longer. I pulled a wool sock from my left foot and climbed on top of Isaac. I placed the sock in his mouth and covered his nose with my other hand, using all of my weight to prevent him from struggling. I held him down until voluntary resistance gave way to the involuntary. "I think something's wrong with Isaac," I whispered to Susie, in a bit of a daze. Susie checked Isaac. "He doesn't have a pulse," she said with a blank expression. "I think he's gone." We needed to act quickly, but something was troubling me. Susie would grow stronger, and I might have to wait a week or more to feed again if I shared Isaac. "I'll move him outside," I told Susie. She did not reply, but she did not object. I lifted Isaac from beneath his arms and dragged his body into the snow. Working quickly, I used my pocket knife to cut into his thigh. I stripped off large pieces of meat and filled my insatiable hunger. The world seemed to drop away. I did not feel the cold. I did not feel remorse. And I did not hear Susie until she screamed. Susie had found me crouched over Isaac with blood running down my chin like some kind of ghoul. She fled in the direction Brian and John had attempted to travel for help. I started to pursue her, but I needed to finish feeding. I fed until I couldn't eat no more, and my strength returned. I felt stronger than ever, but the hunger remained. I found Susie the next day. She had survived the night, but she was not well. She gave me the strength to find my way down the mountain to a small town. I approached the driver for a ride, but he would not assist me. People pointed and spoke in hushed tones as I passed. I don't know why they refused to help me, but I didn't care. I waited until night to approach another driver and used his car to reach the city after feeding. Images flashed through my head, and a crushing tunnel vision consumed me. The beast I saw on the mountain is always with me, but I no longer fear it. I've come to understand its pain as the hunger that consumes me. The world around me no longer exists. All I can see is the young woman with her groceries. She's fumbling with her keys, and I will feed again, soon. Finally, we've been waiting all year. Through the arduous winter, tumultuous spring, and the scorching midsummer, to the temperate late summer stretch. Around this time every year, my wife Kate and I, along with a few friends of ours, all go up to my friend Tom's cottage. It was the near perfect time of year. The days were long, the nights were warm, and the bugs were damn near non-existent. For reasons I won't get into, most of us hadn't seen each other since almost last trip. It was a balm to see one another again. In total, it would be Katie, Crystal, and her elderly pooch Duke, Dennis, Tom, Kurt, and I. Normally, our friend Evan would join us. It was always a pleasure to have him with us, as he was always down for a long and action-packed night. Unfortunately, he was still away, tree planting far out west, which he did for most of the summer. Nonetheless, we were all super excited to get together and let loose before the trees began to turn and the air began to chill. On Tom's property, there were 2 buildings and an outhouse. One was the main cottage. The other was an A-frame where Crystal, Kurt, and Duke would sleep. Dennis, Tom, Kate, and I would all stay in the main cabin, which was quite spacious. Our friend Evan would always bring this terrible piss-water beer called Auspicious Ale. I think the 2 culminating factors of why I loved it so much were the name, as strange as it was, and the price. It was unapologetically dirt cheap. We all began the trip with our own beer, wine, and liquor, but in the end, we all ended up drinking Auspicious. We also do stupid stuff with them, like launch them from the fire pit, or shotgun them. In Evan's absence, Dennis brought a case of Auspicious, partially as a homage, but more so as a joke, I think. The cottage week was off to a great start. Swimming, kayaking, and general adventure during the day. Bonfires, board games, and general shenanigans at night. Drinking all the while. As was somewhat of a tradition, we'd get the fire really built up in the evening and find an old log with rotten out cord to toss on top of the fire. As it eventually caught the flames and started to burn from the inside out, we would shake up an Auspicious and drop it in the center upside down. It was a roulette as to when it would go off, but eventually it'd shoot off like a sudsy rocket. Then we'd scamper to try to find the smoky can and drink whatever hot remnants were inside, depending on how drunk we already were. This time, there was enough for Dennis, Tom, and I, and we taped the ceremonial drinking of the smoky Auspicious. We sent it to Evan to let him know the tradition still lived. We never got a response, though. We'd all joked and jabbed about how much better this was than city living. It certainly beats waiting 20 minutes for a bus that might not really exist every morning, I exclaimed to a group of nodding heads and smiling faces, as we cooked over the coals and poured the Auspicious ales. Later that night, as the wee hours of the morning were approaching, Duke, whose bedtime had already passed, had found sleep by the fireside, roused in an agitated temper. He kept staring off into the woods behind the A-frame, completely still for a few moments, before he would huff and puff in a squirrely fashion. Crystal said it was late, past Duke's bedtime, and late enough for her too. Crystal took Duke to the A-frame with Kurt following shortly after. Kate went inside the main cottage to get a midnight snack and read a bit by the candlelight before bed. Dennis, Tom, and I joked about what was in the forest, supposing it was some sort of hodag, Sasquatch, or a Wendigo. The idea led us on to start telling spooky stories, trying to freak each other out. It's not always easy to do, especially on the spot, but in the dark and silent night, it wasn't too hard to make anything sound scary. After I had told a story about a shape-stealing changeling, which ended with a jump scare, we all had a good laugh. We laughed hard and loud until something big rustled in the bushes. It was the same spot that Duke kept staring at, behind the A-frame. The lights inside were still on, so we knew Crystal and Kurt were still awake, and if nothing was bothering them, it couldn't have been of significance anyways. We brushed it off. The next day we decided to be productive. We all went on a bit of a hike and cleared an old trail that led to another nearby property. It was a bit buggier than we hoped, but there was a small marsh, so it wasn't a big surprise. It was a bit of a roundabout trail. It started to the west of the main cottage, near where we parked the cars, and ended on the northeast side of the property, behind the A-frame. Strangely, the path was more and more cleared closer to the A-frame. It looked like several trees had been uprooted, then replanted back further into the brush. Tom guessed it had something to do with some of his family who'd been up here recently. They probably did some work up here. Maybe they started clearing the trail too, but gave up or decided not to clear the whole way. It made sense, but the replanting didn't. "What about this?" I asked, as I held up an old can of Auspicious ale, crumpled and muddied from having been weathered. "Maybe from last year," Tom said, uncertainly. Although I remember us cleaning up pretty well, and since then my family had been up, so someone must have picked it up, unless they drink Auspicious too. It seemed weird. We only drank it as a joke, but I guess everyone has their own taste. Still, I couldn't help but think back to how Duke reacted towards that area the night before. On the last day of our great northern vacation, we were sorting out everything. Packing up the loaded cars, taking the trash to the dump, and clearing the cottage, Dennis drew my attention to the last of the few auspicious ales. I don't really want to take these home. Kind of don't want to drink them either, to be honest. Yeah, I replied. I'm all partied out now. Maybe we should do something weird with them. Yeah, why don't we bury them somewhere and try to dig them up next year? Dennis laughed. That's a great idea. We'll have Evan with us too, so we can show him the auspicious grave. Dennis and I wandered around the property, looking for a good spot to dig a hole. We wanted it to be deep enough so that it wouldn't freeze in the winter, bursting the cans. It had to be close enough to the cottage that we'd be able to remember and find the spot, but also not so close to be in the way. After taking the trail behind the A-frame for about 1.5 kilometers into the woods, we found a perfect spot where the trail deviated towards the waterfront. We collected some distinct rocks and sticks to put over the auspicious grave and began digging. It was harder than you think. I was surprised how gnarly and difficult it was to dig down there. Tom said that the land here was hard to clear away, a lot of large rocks and roots. Eventually, just a few feet down, we hit something that made a loud metallic crunch. Dennis and I looked at each other, confused. I sifted through the hole, unearthing a very odd and disheveled can of auspicious ale. I began to try to clear away the dirt with my hand to see if there was more in the hole. There was a strange rock, very smooth with a large hole in it. A chill ran down my spine and a strange gnawing sensation started to build in the pit of my stomach. It couldn't be. I feverishly cleared away the dirt, clump by clump, pulling some stray roots aside. Dude, let's just put it there. That should be deep enough. What are you scrambling around for? Dennis muttered impatiently. That's when I cleared enough to see what was really in here. It's a skull, I grimaced. We immediately stopped the whole process and stared into the shallow grave. The remains were not totally decomposed. You could tell there was plenty of insects scrambling about, now that it had been unearthed. More than a little freaked out, Dennis and I went back to the cottage. After putting the shovels and the auspicious on the desk, we told the others what we had found. Our story was first met with disbelief, but everyone could tell deep down by the manner of which Dennis and I told it wasn't a joke. Tom couldn't believe it. At least, he didn't want to. We took him to the corpse to show him. We need to call the cops. We all agreed. The cops questioned us all, but it didn't feel like any of us were being accused of anything. They were definitely having a hard time believing that we were trying to bury a few bears, but I can totally understand how dumb that sounds. We had little enough information to share about it. The cops told us that we had to stick around through the beginning of the investigation, in case anything else came up, so we didn't return to the city. Luckily, the cottage was far enough from the crime scene that we're allowed to stay there, although the police were constantly traipsing through the property to get from the main road to the corpse. A short while later, in the evening, they asked us one by one to view the corpse, keeping us separated from each other in the meantime. Despite the decomposition, they were hoping we may be able to shed some light on its identity. They said decomposition can be a peculiar thing. By this date it had been at least 2 months, but between Canadian weather and soil composition of the area, it could have been there for much longer. I was taken over third. They knew it was probably a long shot, but I think they had little enough to go on. There was something about the stature, hair, and the teeth. I recognized the corpse, or at least I thought I did. It looked just like Evan. I told the officer. I knew how crazy it was. There was no way. Evan came back with us last year. I've seen him multiple times since then. He's been in contact, if only loosely. We did all the same things we normally have done together since the body's supposedly been buried. Gone for drinks, watched movies in my basement, played online games. Nothing added up. We'd even been in, although sporadic, communication with him while he was out west, planting. They didn't need to bring anyone else over to see the corpse after me. Tom, who was brought over first, identified it as Evan the same way I did. They told us until they checked the dental records there was no way for us to know for sure. We gave the officers Evan's contact info, both his and his family's. We were told not to try to contact him and to stay in the area for the next 2 days. At this point, I don't think any of us were happy to have our cottage stay extended. After that, Crystal and Kurt stayed in the main cottage with the rest of us. There was more than enough room, if not just a bit less privacy all around, but I think everyone was much more content to stay closer together. The night was eerie. It was colder than it should have been. We didn't have a fire. No one was interested in hanging around outside. There was a stillness to the air, to the lake too. It wasn't peaceful or serene, it was haunting. The next day was hardly any better. A thick fog moved in during the early morning, and there was so much overcast that the sun could hardly chase it away. It sat blanketing the whole area, like an otherworldly cemetery. All of us were torn halfway, being in shock and completely lost in our thoughts. How could that have been Evan? There was no way. Despite all the partying we had previously done, we knew we weren't going home anytime soon. We'd all spoken fairly little. The meals we had were uninspired and listless, highly irregular for Kurt, Kate, and I, who did most of the cooking. Everything we did felt like we were merely going through the motions. Some of us, myself included, found ourselves overindulging in the remaining alcohol we had. Perhaps to try to avoid the issue, perhaps just as something to keep ourselves occupied. No matter, it led to us trying to call Evan eventually, despite what the cops told us. No answer. We called him several times that night, with no luck. I sent him a few texts hoping he'd see them soon and explain that he was fine, just out in the boonies with no reception for the past week. It wouldn't have been uncommon while he was off planting, I rationalized to myself. It was the early evening on the last day we were stuck up there that things started to turn grim. It felt like we hadn't seen the sun all day, and the fog was even thicker. Everyone seemed more sapped, but we dragged ourselves into action and had everything packed and ready to go as soon as possible. Crystal stepped out front to take Duke for a nature call when we heard him starting to go wild. He was barking up a storm, hopping around and freaking out. I'd seen him bark before, but I'd never seen him get wild like this. For an old dog, he was close to being as savage wolf as I'd ever seen. He ran towards the A-frame, pulling the leash out of Crystal's hand. Curtis and I ran outside to see what the commotion was. As soon as Kurt saw Duke running off into the fog, he sprinted after him, telling Crystal he'd be right back. By this point, we were standing on the wraparound porch of the cottage, yelling for both Kurt and Duke. We all hopelessly scrambled, unsure of what to do, unwilling to get lost in the fog. Duke stumbled back to the front steps of the cottage what felt like an eternity later, shivering. The wolf in him was gone, unlike the rest of us. He was uneasy. Unlike the rest of us, he had seen something in the fog. We all expected Kurt to come wandering back right behind him, but we weren't so lucky. I felt that same nodding sensation, a growing hole in my stomach eating away at me, telling me it was the last time I'd ever see him. Tom was sitting on the porch, with his head in his hands. There'll never be a fog like this. Not here. Never. Dennis suddenly jumped up from a burst of courage. I'm gonna drive into town and get some help. We'll find Kurt and then we'll all get out of here. To hell with the fog. To hell with the cops. The rest of us looked at each other, uncertain. As much as we all wanted to be out of this hellscape, there was no way anyone could drive in this. I know what you're thinking. I won't make it back, but I have to try. We have to do something. And that we all agreed. I'll go with you, I piped up, regretting the offer as soon as it left my lips. No, I'm taking the risk here. It's not worth any more of us getting lost. You're all better staying here. See if you can get a hold of the local cops in the meantime. Kate had been trying to call them since Kurt first ran off into the fog, but kept losing signal. Alternatively, between using each of our phones with no luck. We stood on the porch as Dennis prepared to dash to where he remembered parking his car. None of us had dared to set foot any further, not without a damn good reason. He turned to the rest of us. "I'll be back in no time. Stay safe." The hole in my stomach grew. I felt it again. I was going to lose another friend. "Don't," I spat out. He ignored me and started jogging off into the fog. We had heard a car door open and slam shut. A small relief until a huge crash split the silence. Then the alarm of Dennis's car began blaring. Tom started towards the car, but Kate stopped him. "He'll be fine, I'm sure." "And if he's not?" Tom blurted out angrily. "Then you won't be either. If you run out headlong into the fog like an idiot." Another huge crash followed, silencing the car for good. 20 minutes had passed since Dennis ran into his car. We never heard the engine start. Hope was failing. "I got through. It's ringing," Kate exclaimed. We sat in suspense, wide eyes as she turned on speakerphone. 911, what's your emergency?" "Hello, my friends and I are trapped in the cottage west of Bracebridge. 2 of them went out into the fog and have gone missing. We need help." "Ma'am, I'm going to redirect you to local law enforcement. Can you please tell me the address of the cottage?" "What's the address?" she yelled at Tom. "It's..." A huge crash sounding like a tree being felled could be heard from the distance outside the cottage. Then the line cut. Tom stopped. We all couldn't believe it. Immediately she had tried redialing, but there was no service again. In the middle of the long sleepless night, I was startled by Katie shaking me out of a false sleep. "I heard something in the living room," she said, reaching for the hatchet we decided to keep next to us on the side of the bed. I grabbed the machete on my side, and we slowly crept out to the first floor. It was Tom, standing by the front door, staring out into the fog. We slowly walked up, closer to him, before he spoke as if he was expecting us. "We have to go out there. We have to go after them." "I think you should try to get some rest, dude. We'll sort this thing out in the morning." "No," he snapped. "We need to go now." I heard the rhythmic tapping of Duke's paws on the wooden floor. Crystal was standing a few feet behind us, staring somberly. "It's obvious we can't go out there. There's something seriously disturbing going on here," she said. "It's important that we don't lose anyone else." She was right. It was a foolish notion. I'm not even sure what crossed Tom's mind. We're going to run out of food eventually, if not before drinkable water. Would it be better for us to die a slow death trapped inside, or attempt to find our friends and put all this behind us? He retorted. Somehow I didn't feel like he was being truthful. I didn't believe he really wanted to go out there after Curtis and Dennis. "Why do you really want to go out there, Tom?" I asked, but was met with silence. He simply put up his hands on the glass door, still staring out into the fog. "Let's just all sit down for a second. I'll make us some tea or coffee or something." As I reached for his shoulder, he turned and pushed me back with a primal strength. I fell to the floor. I heard Kate scream, "No!" When I looked up, Tom was gone. The door was ajar. We all sat vacantly around the dining room table. We didn't speak. We couldn't even look at each other. We decided to try to stay inside and hold out until the police came back. What other choice did we really have? After about an hour of silence, I decided to go boil some water for coffee. "What about when Duke has to go to the bathroom again?" Kate said. "We can't go any further than the porch." "None of us can," I hastily responded. At this point, it was 6 a.m. We had pretty much stayed up all night. Other than Tom running off, it was probably the quietest night there had been. Almost suspiciously so. I noticed at this point the absence of sound of the forest. No rustling, no birds, not even the sound of water lapping gently on the nearby shore. Then, as if answering my thoughts out loud, there was a loud crunch, then creaking. At first I had no idea what it had been. Then the creak grew into a groan, then a crash. It was obviously very close. A tree had fallen, and a damn big one by the sound of it. Looking out front, we could see it had landed right over the fire pit, towards the cottage, destroying the front stairs. Luckily, it didn't land any further, I muttered. Then another crunch. Then nothing. At about 7, as the sun should have come up, there was a slight lift to the fog. We could now just barely make out the way down to the fire pit. I went out onto the porch to see if I could make out Dennis's car and see if there was any sign of him. "Hey guys," I heard from the direction of the A-frame. The voice. It was Kurt. "Over here," I hollered. Finally, the first bit of good news. The first bit of luck we'd had. Maybe he had been hiding in the A-frame this whole time and decided to try to make it back to the cottage when the fog cleared up. "Guys, where are you?" he yelled again. Crystal came running out, tears in her eyes. Until now, she had done a remarkable job of keeping her composure since his disappearance. "Kurt, thank God," she almost unintelligibly wailed out as she ran ahead of me on the edge of the porch. "Hey guys, where are you?" we heard again. Something wasn't quite right. "Kurt, over here, man. Where have you been? Follow the sound of my voice." Silence once more. "What are you scrambling for?" we heard yelled from the same direction. It sounded off, though. It definitely wasn't Kurt. "Dennis, is that you?" Kate asked back. "Stay safe." Silence again. It was definitely Dennis's voice. "I don't think it's them," I said softly. We all stared off into the fog in horror. We backed towards the door, not wanting to turn away from the fog. Just as I did, the last one was entering through the doorway. I heard the most bone-chilling phrase. "Try to dig 'em up next year." It was what I said to Dennis before we tried to bury the Auspicious ales. It was in my voice. We closed and locked the door behind us and tried to cover the windows and doors with curtains, sheets, and cushions so nothing could see in. I don't know what the hell was out there, but it sure as shit was not our friends. About an hour had passed since we heard the calls. None of us had eaten. I don't think we could have if we tried. Probably for the best anyways, to help conserve our food. I stood up to go over to the bathroom when I felt a painful feeling in my gut. That hole, that disturbing sensation that told me I'd never see my friends again was back. Stronger than ever. It felt almost like I was sinking. We could hear scraping from just outside the front door. I peeled back the sheet we had used to cover it, just an inch. I first noticed the glint of the empty beer cans gleaming in what little light was there to catch. Something had drained the Auspicious we had left on the porch. I turned my vision up to scour the landscape. I could only see the outline of a person. Someone familiar. Someone I knew. I covered it back up and retreated from the door. Kate and Crystal looked at me, wondering what I had seen. As the lock started to shimmy and release, the door handle turned. I looked at them, almost unable to speak. I told them what I saw. It was Evan.